Hello viewers, today we are going to study Nationalism in India, a famous lecture delivered by Rabindranath Tagore in America. All of you are quite familiar with Rabindranath Tagore. Therefore, before going into the discussion of the lecture, we will try to recollect some particular aspects of his life. Tagore was born in the second half of the 19th century, a period during which the nationalist movement in India against the British rule was gaining momentum. In 1905, the Swadeshi movement started on Tagore's doorstep as a response to the British policy of partitioning Bengal. I hope you remember Indian history. At the turn of the 20th century, Bengal was leading the nationalist movement, and the British government was not able to face its power. So, they divided Bengal into two parts. The Indians did not like it, and hence much agitation went on for months together. Normally, Tagore was quite apolitical by temperament. Tagore was first drawn into the movement and started giving lectures and writing patriotic songs with such fervor that Ezra Pound quipped, "Tagore has sung Bengal into a nation." I use the word apolitical here. Do you know what it means? It means that he was not much concerned about politics in general. He was neither for nor against politics. Then what happened? Tagore saw the movement turning violent, with the nationalists agitating against innocent civilians. A champion of ahimsa or non-violence, Tagore found it difficult to accept the insanity of the nationalists in their burning of all foreign goods as a mark of non-cooperation. It was hurting the poor in Bengal, who found homemade products more expensive than foreign goods. Moreover, he was disheartened to see that the youth turned to the cult of the bomb, hoping to liberate their motherland from foreign rule by violence and terror. Thus, finally, Tagore withdrew from the movement. Tagore took the view that what India needed was not a blind revolution or the miracle of political freedom built upon the quicksand of social slavery. Here I am quoting, he wanted steady, purposeful education or an evolution from within. What India most needed was constructive work coming from within herself. He argued thus. He said, first mitigate the sufferings of the masses, educate them, make them ready to handle self-rule, and then strive for freedom. Tagore maintained that India's immediate problems were social and cultural and not political. India is a world in miniature. This is where the races and the religions have met. Therefore, she must constantly strive to resolve her burden of heterogeneity by evolving out of these warring contradictions a great synthesis. Tagore directly plunges into the topic at the very outset. He starts the lecture by announcing, here I quote, "Our real problem in India is not political, it is social." He goes on to show why India is different from the Western countries, and therefore the Western model of independence movement cannot work for India. Europeans had their racial unity from the beginning, but natural resources were insufficient for the inhabitants. Therefore, their civilization is marked by political and commercial aggressiveness. Moreover, their neighbors were strong and greedy, so they developed unity within themselves and animosity against outsiders. That solved their problems. But in India, natural resources were plenty, so the people never had to look outside of India for sustenance or survival. As they were not in need of fighting outsiders, the question of grouping themselves against others did not arise at all. But from the earliest times, India has had her own problem constantly before her. It is the race problem, the problem of various races staying together. When our nationalists talk about ideals, they forget that the basis of nationalism is lacking here in India. First and foremost, India must address the caste issue. India has all along been trying experiments in evolving a social unity. By introducing caste system, India has tried to solve the race problem in such a manner as to avoid all friction and yet to afford each race freedom within its boundaries. But later on, the caste system became too rigid. What was once meant to introduce social order by accommodating the various racial groups in India has now become a gigantic system of cold-blooded repression. In spite of our great difficulty, however, India has tried to make an adjustment of races and seek for some basis of unity. This basis has come through our saints. You all know their names, like Nanak, Kabir, Sri Chaitanya and others, preaching one God to the races of India. The caste system too is the outcome of this spirit of toleration. But as the ground reality changed in later times, we have to alter our attitude and follow the repercussions. India ought to come out of this social stagnation by educating the people out of their trance. Only when the immovable walls of society were removed or made flexible will India regain her vitality and dynamism as a society, and then only India can find true freedom. Tagore argues, what is the purpose of political freedom when the elites in society are exploiting the lower classes, especially the untouchables, so ruthlessly? India ought to come out of this social stagnation by educating the people. Tagore makes comparison between India and America. So, we will go into that aspect now. Tagore compares the Indian situation with that of America. Both have some certain similarities. As in India, in America too, there are people of many races. He told the Americans that they themselves were caste-ridden, as is evident from their treatment of the Red Indians and the Negroes. You have not got over your attitude of caste toward them. You have used violent methods to keep aloof from other races. But until you have solved the question in America, you have no right to question India. Europe has lost faith in humanity and has become distrustful and sickly. America, on the other hand, is not pessimistic or unconcerned. The Americans know that they can be better, and that knowledge drives them on. Tagore tells the Americans that America is destined to justify Western civilization to the East. The freedom of their history from all unclean entanglements fits them in their career of holding the banner of civilization of the future. All the great nations of Europe have their victims in other parts of the world. This deadens their moral and intellectual sympathy. Englishmen can never truly understand India because their minds are not disinterested with regard to this country. If one compares England with Germany or France, one will find she has produced the smaller number of scholars who have studied Indian literature and philosophy with any amount of sympathetic insight. This attitude of apathy and contempt is natural where the relationship is abnormal and founded upon national selfishness and pride. The colonizers think that they are the masters and hence superior beings than the native people. So, why should they show interest or respect to the culture of the Indians? If anything, they always played down India's rich tradition and spiritual greatness. But American history has been disinterested, and that is why Americans have been able to help Japan in her lessons in Western civilization, and that is why China can look upon them with her best confidence in this dangerous period. In fact, Americans are carrying all the responsibility of a great future. Therefore, all the countries of the earth, America has to be fully conscious of this future. Her vision must not be obscured, and her faith in humanity must be strong with the strength of the youth. In our early history, when the geographical limits of each country were small, it was sufficient for men to develop their sense of unity within their area of segregation. In those days, they combined among themselves and fought against others. But it was this moral spirit of combination which was the true basis of their greatness, and this fostered their art, science, and religion. Tagore questions, can we ever hope that these moral barriers against our race amalgamation will not stand in the way of our political unity? The very people who are upholding nationalistic ideals are themselves the most conservative in their social practice. Nationalists say, look at Switzerland, where in spite of race differences, the peoples have solidified into a nation. But these same nationalists forget that in Switzerland the races can mingle, they can intermarry because they are of the same blood. About India, we can't say that one person belonging to a certain caste cannot marry in another caste. So, Tagore says, here I quote, in India there is no common birthright. But when we talk of Western nationality, we forget that the nations there do not have that physical repulsion that we have among different castes in India. Yet, do we have an instance in the whole world where a people who are not allowed to mingle their blood shed their blood for one another? If any person is in distress, another person, to whatever caste he belongs to, will go ahead and save that person. This is unthinkable in any other nation. Even if you find some instances elsewhere, they are done by coercion or for mercenary purposes. Mercenary purposes means for money, people will do anything. So, examples can be found that way, not in the normal way that we see in India. What India needs most is constructive work coming from within herself. We must show those who are over us that we have the strength of moral power in ourselves, the power to suffer for truth. This is what our religion teaches us, this power to suffer for truth. Tagore says, in my country, we have been seeking to find out something common to all the races, which will prove their real unity. No nation looking for a mere political or commercial basis of unity will find such a solution sufficient. Men of thought and power will discover the spiritual unity, will realize it and preach it. Those who are gifted with the moral power of love and vision of spiritual unity, who have the least feeling of enmity against the aliens and the sympathetic insight to place themselves in the position of others, will be the fittest to take their permanent place in the age that is lying before us. So, here I will repeat the thing because this is very important, that what is Tagore's suggestion on who are the fittest people to lead the country. So, he says that those who are gifted with the moral power of love and vision of spiritual unity, this is very important, who have the least feeling of enmity against the aliens. And also another thing is very much important in them, they should have the sympathetic insight to place themselves in the position of others. They only are the fittest people who can take their permanent place in the age that is lying before us. Those who are constantly developing their instinct of fight and intolerance of aliens will be eliminated. Heterogeneity is the problem before us, and we have to prove our humanity by solving it through the help of our higher nature. Tagore also speaks about how India can contribute to the amalgamation of races, which must be followed by the different races of the world. He says, in finding the solution of our problem, we would help to solve the world problem as well. What India has been, the whole world is becoming one country through scientific facility, and the moment is arriving when one must find a basis of unity which is not political. If India can offer to the world her solution, it will be a contribution to the entire humanity. Tagore says, the West, enjoying homogeneity of races, has never given her attention to this problem of heterogeneity, and whenever confronted with it, she has tried to make it easy by ignoring it altogether. I hope you understand these two words. Homogeneity of races means only one stock of race people stay there, and heterogeneity means where people of many races stay together. So, in India and America, the country is heterogeneous, but in most of the European countries, the people are homogeneous in nature. If you understand this, the lecture becomes quite easy to understand. So, what do the Westerners do? They, whenever they confront the heterogeneity, they try to make it easy by ignoring it altogether. In America and Australia, Europe has simplified the problem by almost exterminating the original population. They have killed off people. But India tolerated differences of races from the first, and that spirit of toleration has acted all through her history. Tagore directly tells them, here I quote, either you shut your doors against the aliens or reduce them into slavery. And this is your solution of the problem of race conflict. Whatever may be its merits, you will have to admit that it does not spring from the higher impulses of civilization, but from the lower passions of greed and hatred. During the evolution of the nation, the moral culture of brotherhood was limited by geographical boundaries, because at that time those boundaries were true. Now they have become imaginary lines of tradition, divested of the qualities of real obstacles. Previously, people could not move about crossing the seas and rivers and mountains. So, that time geographical boundaries had some meaning. Now, it is of no concern anymore. So, the real obstacles have gone. So, what is the use of being combined into a nation? So, Tagore says the time has come when man's moral nature must deal with this great fact with all seriousness or perish. He viewed that nationalism fosters separatism. When you are grouping amongst yourself, the conclusion is you are separating yourself from others. So, this Tagore did not like at all. So, he says nationalism fosters separatism. In his words, separatist nationalism devoid of love for mankind is a great menace. He rejected the idea of nation state and believed in the great federation of man. This is his idea, great federation of man. The entire world is one country only. That was his idea. He says emphatically, "It is my conviction that my countrymen will gain truly their India by fighting against that education which teaches them that a country is greater than the ideas of humanity." Tagore had dreams of a divine kingdom, so he advised the races of the world to iron out the differences among themselves and to mingle their heart with one another. This will fulfill the idea of a divine kingdom. Now we come nearly to the conclusion of the essay. So, I will give you the summary of the conclusion now. Tagore says, "I am not against one nation in particular, but against the general idea of all nations." What is a nation? It is the aspect of a whole people as an organized power. He says, what is the nation? It is the aspect of a whole people as an organized power. This organization incessantly keeps up the insistence of the population on becoming strong, and this drains man's energy from his higher nature, where he is self-sacrificing and creative. Tagore completes the essay with saying, "I will persist in believing that there is such a thing as the harmony of completeness in humanity, where poverty does not take away his riches, where defeat may lead him to victory, death to immortality, and in the compensation of eternal justice, those who are the last may yet have their insult transmuted into a golden triumph." So, he says the poor and the downtrodden will have their time to come up in life. That will be the real triumph of humanity, when the rich and the powerful stop ignoring these people, and the poor and the backward, they can come up. That is the triumph of the entire humanity. This commercialism of the modern age is setting up the ideal of brute power over the power of perfection. Tagore says, and it is true, that a spiritual person is perfect, a commercial person is not. So, the power of perfection has to be brought and brute power has to be abolished altogether. With its barbarity of ugly decorations, it is a terrible menace to all humanity. It is making the cult of self-seeking take pride in its naked shamelessness. Our nerves are more delicate than our muscles. Things that are the most precious in us are helpless as babies when we take away from them the careful protection. Therefore, when the callous rudeness of power runs amok in the broad way of humanity, it scares away by its grossness the ideals which we have cherished for centuries. India is an idealistic nation. So, the callous rudeness of the Western countries, by making India its colony, it is taking away, it is scaring away the cherished ideas that we had in India for centuries together. So, that has to be brought back by our spiritual power. Rabindranath warns the people that no nation should project itself in terms of mine and thine, means my and yours. This will create antagonism among themselves. People will be enemy of each other. Keeping much above it, one should feel his existence in the world as a member of one divine nation. This is very idealistic. In his words, from now onward, any nation which takes an isolated view of its own country will run counter to the spirit of the new age and know no peace. From now onward, the anxiety that each country has for its own safety must embrace the welfare of the world. Thus, Tagore ends the lecture with this optimistic view of ushering a divine kingdom based on spiritual fellowship. So, we see in this essay that Tagore was a great nationalist. His nationalistic songs became a rage during the independence movement, yet he was averse to narrow nationalism that pitted man against another man. He denounced the craze of materialism that led to narrow-mindedness and greed. He favored the union of all mankind as children of God. So, although he spent his life in Calcutta, the political hotbed of Indian independence movement, he stayed away from hectic activities because he promoted social improvement before political movement. So, here we end our first part of this nationalistic essay. So, this portion we have discussed the main text in detail. In my next class, I will discuss the other literary aspects of this essay and why this is so important. So, these aspects we keep for our next class. Okay? Thank you, viewers.